This is 7 Minute Cyber with Danny Lawler of Aquest and myself, Sam Glynn of Code in Motion. And the 7 minutes start now.
So, Sam, we saw that the Central Bank of Ireland published a statement about an admin sanction action that they had concluded with the governor and company of the Central Bank of the Bank of Ireland, even in relation to a cybersecurity incident that occurred. We talked previously in some of the videos about how often the cyber incidences aren't that sophisticated. The actual attack isn't that sophisticated. And we talked a little bit about how these can play out with your regulator. But in this instance, Sam, I think that it's a good case study for how things can play out in practice. The crime itself wasn't actually that sophisticated.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the technical side of it. And as you say, in a previous recording that we did, we talked about the likelihood that if you're going to be a victim of a cyber crime, the likelihood is it will be via email, and it will be because a staff member has been fooled, has been socially engineered. And this is what's happened in this case. And it's not the only case recently reported. There was also a case of a Premiership football club that nearly transferred a significant sum of money to the wrong bank account because a fraudster had got between them and a transfer target. But in the Bank of Ireland case, it was a case of a client who appeared to be a client but turned out to be a fraudster who had hacked the email account of the client, sending instructions to the bank, instructing them to transfer the client's funds to a UK bank account. So it was technically an email hack of a personal account of a client, and then it was socially engineering of a Bank of Ireland employee who, for whatever reason, didn't have the processes or didn't follow processes to confirm the identity of the person sending the mail, to check why new banking details were provided as the recipient account, and other information that was provided by the central bank, which indicated that this was not the individual at hand.
Yeah. So it wasn't thousands of people in a supervillain's lair with supercomputers. It was pretty straightforward at this time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a client's email account, so it's hard to say what kind of email account it was, but it could very well have been an Aircom account or a Gmail account, and someone had figured out a client's password, and for all we know, the client's password was password. It wasn't a corporate email account, so even from a Bank of Ireland perspective, they might have security around their email accounts, but they obviously have no control over the security on a client's email account, which reiterates the need for, if you're receiving an email with payment instructions and you have no idea the level of security around those email accounts, it reinforces the need to verify those instructions.
Absolutely. And for me, then, the interesting thing is that the cyber crime amounted to about €106,000 loss, which the repaid immediately. But that morphed then into a fine, a sanction from the central bank. The full amount of the sanction was 2.3 million, but it was reduced for the early settlement discount down to 1.66 million. So it went from 100,000 to 1.6 million, pretty significant jump. And I guess that reflects the interaction between the bank and the central bank once the issue had been identified by the central bank, and how the behavior of an individual firm, I think, can influence where this goes. Getting hacked or being the subject of a cybersecurity breach or being a regulated firm and having any type of regulatory breach happens. But I've heard the regulator say before that it's not just what the breach is, it's how the firm responds to the breach. It can have a huge impact, both in terms of the outcome, but also the regulator's view on the firm. And in this instance, it appears that the incident was identified by the central bank when they did a review of the Bank of Ireland. It wasn't notified to the central bank specifically. And then once they started to dig further, they found that the Gardaí hadn't been notified, so they had to instruct the bank to do that. And they also found that there had been internal reviews and reports produced internally that recommended actions that still hadn't been taken. And those reports hadn't been sent in a forthcoming manner to the central bank. So the central bank felt that they had to dig in order to get this information. And of course, firms and regulated firms are required to be open and transparent in their dealings with the regulator. So this approach obviously was identified by the regulator as an aggravating factor that caused the fine and the sanction to be that bit bigger than it might otherwise have been.
Yeah, I mean, there was the mistake, and unfortunately, mistakes happen. And it sounds like it was failures on the process side about how the process was designed. So staff didn't know to confirm details and things. The mistake was identified by the client, which was lucky, but unfortunately, it sounds like the fraudster got away with the 100 grand, and the bank was on the hook for that. But the learnings don't seem to have been embedded in the process. So there were reports, reviews done of how the failures happened, and recommendations as to how the process should change. And it would appear that the process wasn't changed in a timely manner. And then, as you say, on top of that, when the regulator came in and started digging around, it does suggest that maybe the organization failed in terms of the transparency and the engagement with the regulator. So not only did they lose money on the mistake, they also lost significant sums of money and also reputational damage as a result of their response immediately afterwards, and then in the longer term when the regulator knocked on the door.
Yeah, and we talked previously about how to respond when a cybersecurity incident occurs. I think if you are in a regulated firm and you find yourself in that situation, you should expect that the regulator is going to be interested and want to investigate further. And I think you should expect that you will receive a risk mitigation program. Receiving a risk mitigation program.
That's it. 1 minute warning.
That's a warning, is it? Let's wrap up. It's not terribly unusual to receive a risk mitigation program, but it's important how you respond to it. That kind of determines how the whole situation plays out. So what are the learnings for you, Sam, before I wrap up?
I think from a technical perspective, it's if you're going to be a victim of a cybercrime, try to make it a sophisticated crime. In this case, they had no control over the email account of a client, so a firm shouldn't trust an instruction received that way, in the way that if a letter is received in the post, you wouldn't necessarily automatically assume it's from the client. And you would take steps to verify the instruction and verify the identity. And then in the incident response, there was a response, there were reports done, but the learnings weren't embedded back in the process, it would seem. So, never miss the opportunity for a learning when mistakes happen.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, where I've seen firms perform well after a breach, they've done 3 simple things. There we go. They've owned it, they've fixed it, and they've kept it fixed. And when they've engaged with the regulators, they've been open about the fact that it happened and what went wrong and what they've done to fix it. And where firms have taken that approach, I've seen them have much better outcomes than, for example, in this type of situation where you end up with an admin sanction, a very large fine, and people on YouTube and LinkedIn doing videos sort of investigating further or talking further about your organization or what went wrong. You'd rather avoid that if you could.
Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks, Danny.
Thanks, Sam.